Today is the Feast of the Assumption of Our Lady. Well, it's the Sunday within the octave of the Assumption of Our Lady. The actual feast day is on the 15th of August each year, which was this Friday. It's also the 9th Sunday after Trinity, with the intent of confidence. But the Assumption, being a major festival, takes precedence. So the focus of my sermon today is going to be about the Assumption of Our Lady and how this can actually help us grow in confidence as Christians and lead richer and fuller lives. Before I go into these details, I'll say a few words about what this feast actually celebrates and commemorates. Now, the name of the feast, the Assumption of Our Lady, comes from the fact that in Catholic teachings, and indeed I believe the Orthodox Church shares similar beliefs, Mary did not die a natural death in the sense that at the end of her earthly life, she was assumed taken up into heaven. Her body and soul rose up into heaven, just as Jesus Christ did. But note the terminology here. We're using the term assumption rather than ascension, which is the term that we used to describe Jesus Christ's entry into heaven. And the reason for this is that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He is God. He is able to rise into heaven through his own power, hence he ascended. However, Mary is the mother of God, but she is not God. She cannot enter heaven of her own power. Rather, she entered heaven through the grace of God. And this teaching, it's found in some apocryphal writings, but it's not actually found in the canonical Bible. But there is some support for it, like, for example, the fact that, unlike with many other saints, there are no relics of Mary's earthly remains, which supports the idea that at the end of her earthly life, she was assumed into heaven. So, what can this feast teach us about confidence, and how can it help us to grow as Christians? Well, let's start with the collect. The collect refers to Mary's wondrous humility and purity, saying that for this wondrous humility and purity, our Lord Christ exalted the Holy Lady Mary among the hosts of heaven. And this collect asks us to follow her most noble example so that we may, at the latter end, be found worthy to serve God, even as do the holy angels. Now, this collect is quite important because it refers to two attributes of Mary that we should emulate in our lives. And these are humility and purity. And how this relates to confidence is that if we exhibit these attributes, then we may at the latter end be found worthy to serve God. And there's this wonderful little statement in one of the meditations for the Rosary of the Seven Rays, which is a rosary that we do in the Liberal Catholic Church, where when we meditate on the joyous mystery of the Assumption, we say that Mary has shown us that where she walked, we too may walk if we follow her guidance. So what this means is that if we follow Mary's guidance and live a godly life, then we too may, at the end of our earthly lives, be found worthy to serve God and achieve union with God, just as Mary did. The Assumption is essentially this expression of divine union with God, which we should strive for as Christians. And the Epistle and Gospel for today go into a little bit more detail about how we can exhibit some of these attributes, like humility and purity, which is referred to in the collect, and also wisdom, which our epistle discusses. So let's start with humility and purity. This is discussed in the Gospel in an indirect way. The Gospel today is from St. Luke, right from the very first chapter, and it tells the story of the Annunciation, which is the event when the Archangel Gabriel visited Mary and told her that she would bear the Son of God. And what does this say about humility and purity? Well, right at the end, Mary says, "Behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word." Mary didn't think that she knows better than God and the angels. She didn't just do her own thing. Instead, she accepted the guidance of God with the greatest humility. And by all accounts, Mary lived a very pure and very chaste and virtuous life. So that's why she was found to be worthy to carry the Son of God in the very beginning. And as such, Mary lived a life of total obedience to God and to his commandments. We too can also get closer to God by obeying his commandments and following his laws. So, namely by loving God and loving our neighbour, which is the great commandment that is referred to in the Gospels. So this is one of the examples that Mary gives us. The other one is the concept of wisdom, and this one is a little bit more mystical. This is often associated, this attribute of wisdom, which is discussed in some detail in our epistle, which comes from the book of the Wisdom of Solomon. It's often associated with Mary because in the Christian religion, Mary tends to be related with the feminine aspect of divinity. And another thing that's often related with this feminine aspect of divinity is Sancta Sophia, divine wisdom. And Mary, through accepting the angel's guidance and living her life in accordance with God's commandments, essentially showed a form of wisdom which is deeper than the wisdom of the world. If you watched last week's homily by Archbishop Richard, he discussed the difference between the wisdom that comes from the world and the wisdom that comes from God. So the wisdom that's represented by Mary is this divine wisdom that comes from above. Or, as we say in the liberal Catholic Church, it's this wisdom that comes from within, from our hearts. So, by living lives of purity and humility, we can cultivate this divine wisdom. By loving our fellow human beings and spending time in God's presence, we can open our hearts and let this wisdom shine through. And if we do these things, then we can have confidence that we are on a path that will eventually, maybe at the end of this life, maybe at the end of many other lives, reach divine union with God, just as Mary did. So these are some wonderful things to meditate on during this week as we celebrate the Assumption of Our Lady. And another thing I might encourage you to do is have a look into the Rosary of the Seven Rays. This is a wonderful practice to perform, particularly during weeks such as this, when the influence of Our Lady upon the world is very strong. Thank you.